This meeting will deal with a very important subject, which is the visa. And Ms. Kazemi is the chief of the Non-Immigrant Visa Unit at the US Consulate in Casablanca, Morocco. She is responsible for implementing US policies for business, tourism, educational, and cultural exchange visas.
It is wonderful to see that the Moroccan American community is just as warm and hospitable and courteous and inviting as the Moroccan community in Casablanca and throughout Morocco. The most important thing for getting a non-immigrant visa is to show that you don't intend to be an immigrant. You don't want to live in the United States. So we look at someone's ties to their home country. For adults, we look at, do you have a stable job? If you've been working in your job for 10 years, you show that you are committed to it. You show that you have your family in Morocco, you own a house, or maybe you own a business. These things all suggest that you're going to come back, that you really are going to the United States for a business trip or to see a relative or because you really want to see New York City. And that's wonderful, and we want to facilitate that travel. So we look for those strong ties. And children, they depend on their parents' ties. So we want to see that the parents have those things, because obviously a child isn't going to have a job or a house or, dependents to take care of. So what family members should bring to the interview, and it is important to bring the documents, is the documentation that shows what your ties are. You want to bring the attestation de travail, the salaire. If you own a house or an apartment, bring the deed. If you own a piece of land, bring the deed. If you have a business, bring the commercial registration for that. These are things that we like to look at to see what people's ties are. And then the next thing is that we ask is, how are you going to pay for your trip? And if your family member is going to pay for the trip themselves, they should bring their bank documents that show that they have sufficient money to pay for it. If you're going to pay for the trip, we should see your documents to show that you can pay for the plane ticket. If you want to send a letter of invitation, that's terrific, but there's nothing magic that you can put into a letter that is going to guarantee someone a visa. They really do have to show that their intent is to use the visa properly and then go home when their trip is done. Another good thing to know is you don't have to get the letters notarized, you don't have to get a special form, you don't need a seal, you don't have to swear on anything, there are no laws. If you just want to write a letter and say, I really like it if my mother can come be with me, my husband and I are going to have a baby and we'd like her to be here. That's terrific. It's helpful to us to understand the reason of travel. But like I said, there's no fancy form or sort of necessary legal steps for a letter of invitation. The next type of visa, that we see that a lot of people ask about, that's very popular, is a student visa. And some of you might have young family members who want to come and study in the United States. And today and tomorrow I'm visiting a number of universities in the area that have a lot of Moroccan students. And we're talking about visa issues and how students pick the schools they go to, and how do they show that they are a bona fide student, how do they get a visa to come study in the US. So we know that American credentials are very well respected in Morocco. We think that's fantastic, that the skills that we value as Americans, critical thinking, creativity, those things are also valued in the Moroccan business sector. We know that, and we know why Moroccan students want to study in America, and we want to facilitate that. We think it's fantastic when someone wants to take an opportunity to improve their life through education. So we want to do everything we can to make sure that legitimate students can come to the United States and study. And if they then get a job in America and stay, that's fantastic. If they go back to Morocco and contribute to their home country's economy, and they build a business or they get a great job, that's great also. So what we look at is there are a number of documents that a student needs. They need to work with the institution where they want to study and get a petition called an I-20. And you can find all of this information on our website. I'll pass out the pamphlets for this as well. There's a fee they have to pay to get the visa interview, and then they make an appointment and they come and they have an interview. And what we look for during the interview is we ask the applicants 3 questions. I'm telling you this right now because there are no trick questions in our interviews. Some of the students might think that it's like an exam that they have to study for. But really, we want to know 3 very basic things. Why do you want to come to America to study? Why did you pick this school? And what do you want to study? Because what's important for us to see is that the students have really thought about this, because it's a big deal to move 5,000 miles away from home and to leave your family and to go somewhere for years to pursue a course of study. And we think anyone who is very serious about that is going to give a little bit of thought to what they want to do. So we look and make sure that the students know what they're studying. If you're going for an associate's program, what is your plan after that? Do you want to come back to Morocco after 2 years? Do you want to get a bachelor's degree after that? We want to know, if you want to become an engineer, do you know that you have to, finish a bachelor's degree, that an associate's degree is not sufficient? So those are the things we look at. If the student claims to be proficient in English, we do the interview in English to make sure that that's correct. If the student is going for a master's degree program, we make sure that they have the equivalent of a US bachelor's degree, which would be a Bac plus 4. So we make sure that they have those things. And finally, and this is the toughest part, we make sure that they can pay for their studies. And we know this is the toughest part because no one wants to tell a promising student, no, you can't go study because you can't pay for it. But one of the hardest parts of our job is to recognize that students coming to the United States from abroad are not allowed to work during their first year of undergraduate studies. And so they have to be able to show that they can pay for that year of school without working, because if they do work, it will be illegal, and I can't give a visa to someone who's going to be breaking US labor laws by working without authorization. So it is difficult, but we look to see how it's going to be funded. And talking to the schools today, where a lot of students study, there is a misconception that I'd love to dispel, that it's better if the person paying for your school is in the United States. Generally speaking, we kind of expect that the person paying for your school is going to be you and your parents. So if your dad has the money, don't have him wire it to your uncle in America and then say, oh, my uncle is paying for school. It's perfectly fine if the money is coming from abroad. We want to see, who's actually funding the study. And we know that a lot of times students will come and live with a family member in the US so that they can save on their expenses to study. And we know then that they don't have all these very high cost of living expenses, that they really will need to pay for their tuition. After their first year of study, students can use what's called the CPT program to work up to 20 hours a week when they are students. And there are schools that are affordable enough that the students can, pay for a sizable portion of their academic costs through the CPT program. After students finish studying in the US, they finish their program. I'm sure some of you came to the US as students. They have the opportunity for optional professional training, the OPT program, which gives them, depending on their field, a year to 2.5 years to get job experience while using their student visa after they graduate. And for a lot of students, this is the gateway to a permanent job and an H-1B visa, which will allow them to extend their stay in the United States for a much longer period of time. And people routinely transition from being H-1Bs to lawful permanent residents and eventually become citizens. So there are opportunities for students in the United States, once they have the student visa, to come to the US, to study, to get some job experience, and then either stay in H-1B status or return to Morocco and use not only their education but their professional experience that they gained here to better themselves, to better the Moroccan economy, to get a great job in Morocco. I'm going to go ahead now and talk about immigrant visas, because those are the next largest categories. Those are probably a category that is of concern to a lot of people here. You want to know, can I bring my brother to the United States? Can my parents come live with me? And the answer, generally speaking, is yes. There are different processes for this, but the main purpose of US immigration law is to reunify families. So our goal is to keep families together. And so we do facilitate people bringing their children and their spouses and their parents to come live in the US. The way this is done is dependent upon who is applying for a family member. If you are a US citizen, you can apply for your parents, for your spouse, for your minor children, and for children that you plan to adopt to come live in the United States, and there is no limitation on the number of people in this category who can come to the United States every year, which means that there isn't a long wait for these groups of people. If you are an immediate relative of a US citizen, the process of getting an immigrant visa takes about a year. But that's mainly the paperwork and sort of filling out the forms, making sure you have everything, making sure everything is correct and in order, and then having the interview. There's no waiting list for these groups of people because, like I said, we want to reunify families. There is a waiting list for the brothers and sisters of US citizens, the married adult children of US citizens, and the adult children, so children over the age of 21. So we do allow family reunification for these individuals to come live with their family in the United States, but the process takes a much longer time. You know, you'll see a wait of 6, 7, 8 years between the time a petition is filed. And the reason is because we only allow a certain number of people to come from this status into the United States every year. So there is what's called a waiting list. I know 6, 7, 8 years is a very long time. Believe it or not, Morocco is not the longest wait list. The Philippines, it takes over 25 years for a sibling petition. And people still do it, you know? They get to America and the very first thing they do once they become a US citizen is they file for their brothers and sisters. But I know it's a very long process, but if it's something that you want to do, it does become available. Members of my family, in fact, did the same thing. They've petitioned for siblings. So it takes a long time. It is a much longer process, but we do engage in family reunification for siblings and adult children as well. For lawful permanent residents, they can apply for it's most of the same individuals to come and live in the United States. They can apply for their spouse, their minor children, and their adult unmarried children to come. But these categories are all limited, so they all have that 6 or 7 or 8 year wait period. The good news is that if you're a lawful permanent resident and you apply for a family member, when you become a citizen, their case gets converted to citizen status, so the numerical limitation goes away. So you can do all the paperwork when you are an LPR, and then when you become a citizen, they'll fast track the case, and your family member will be able to come to the United States much more quickly and much more easily. In terms of what you need to apply, this is a far more complicated case than a tourist visa. You can get all the papers together for a tourist visa in about half an hour, basically. For the lawful permanent residents, there's a petition that you have to file. They need to provide a medical report to show that they're generally in good health. We need, court certificates to show that they don't have a giant civil judgment against them that they're trying to escape from. We need to see their birth certificate, their marriage certificate, divorce certificates if they're applicable, police records. And we need all of these things translated into English. All the documents for a non-immigrant visa, we all, read French and read Arabic, so we can deal with the documents in the original. But the immigrant petitions all have to be translated by a translator. It's not enough if you do it because you speak both Arabic and English. You need to have an actual professional translator translate all of these documents. And then finally, we need the sponsor affidavit, a document called an I-864, which is something the sponsor needs to fill out that shows that you can afford to support your relative.